2018, an infamous video game character cried. Not metaphorically, not through clever cinematography or symbolic imagery. A giant gray, scarred man, who had previously torn the head off the sun god, murdered death itself, and razed Mount Olympus to rubble, sat in a forest and wept over his dead wife. And millions of people wept with him. This is the contradiction I want to investigate, because Kratos is, by any objective measure, one of the most violent entities in the history of fiction. He is not misunderstood. He is not redeemable in the traditional sense. He has done things that make war criminals look like they lacked ambition. And yet, he is beloved. Not tolerated, not appreciated as a guilty pleasure. Genuinely deeply beloved. And the question is why?
Winston, you really gonna spend 7 minutes asking why people like a buff man will just punch gods? Some of us would just say obvious reasons, you know.
Some of us will be missing the point entirely. But before we get to Kratos specifically, we need to identify something. Because he didn't appear in a vacuum. He arrived as part of a pattern that has existed for as long as humans have been telling stories. The pattern of the broken warrior. Achilles, invincible in battle, consumed by grief and rage after the death of Patroclus. His arc isn't a hero's journey. It's a man being slowly dismantled by the weight of who he is. Hercules to the Romans, performed 12 impossible labors, not as heroism, as penance, because he had killed his own family in a divine-induced rage, and no amount of monster slaying could actually fix that. The myth is about a man trying to atone for something unatonable. Moving forward, Wolverine, a man who had lived so long and lost so much that he can barely form attachments without knowing he will outlive them. The claws are not the only interesting part of him. The claws are just a symptom. The condition is being defined by violence and unable to escape it. Guts from Berserk, born from the corpse of a hanged woman, raised by mercenaries, betrayed by his closest companion in the most devastating way the manga could construct. Condemned to a life of fighting creatures that cannot be killed by ordinary men. His existence is suffering with a sword. Then Vegeta, a prince who arrived as a villain, defined by pride and the need to dominate, gradually revealed to be a man whose entire world was taken from him as a child and who has been performing strength ever since because he does not know any other way to exist.
Okay, but every single one of them man big, and them all fight things. Maybe that's the pattern, Winston. Big man, hit problem.
The size is incidental. The grief is the architecture. Each of these characters follow the same underlying structure, an exceptional capacity for destruction, combined with the wound that the destruction cannot heal. They are powerful in a way that has cost them everything, and we are apparently endlessly fascinated by that combination. Kratos is the most complete version of this archetype ever constructed, and I mean that precisely. He didn't just lose something, he lost everything, multiple times, across multiple mythologies, and kept going anyways. We'll come back to what that actually means in a moment, because there is a mechanism underneath all of this, and it's more uncomfortable than it looks. There is a concept of psychology called catharsis. The idea, originating with Aristotle, is that witnessing intense emotional experience through fiction allows an audience to process and release their own suppressed emotions. You cry at the film not because the characters are real, but because the characters are performing something you have been carrying silently. Kratos is a catharsis machine, specifically engineered, whether intentionally or by instinct, to discharge several things at once. First, rage. The original God of War trilogy is essentially permission. Permission to be furious, at systems, at fate, at the things that took from you. Kratos doesn't manage his anger. He doesn't process it in therapy. He finds the thing responsible and he destroys it. There is a profound, slightly alarming relief in watching that. Because most people are angry about something they cannot destroy.
That second image, that one feel a little too specific, man.
Second is grief. The later games, specifically God of War 2018 and Ragnarök, flip the catharsis. It's no longer about rage as release, it's about grief as burden. Kratos has lost his first wife, his daughter, his entire Greek identity. He is now raising a son he doesn't know how to love, in a mythology that is once again trying to destroy him, while carrying the weight of every terrible thing he has ever done. And the game does not let him put that weight down. That's the point. He carries it. He continues. He chooses again and again to keep going for someone else. There is a scene in God of War 2018 where Kratos admits to his son Atreus, quietly, that he is a god. Not with pride, with something closer to confession. He says, "I have killed many gods. I was wrong to do so." 6 words, from a character who spent 3 entire games justified in every act of divine destruction. That line lands because the games earned it. You watch the rage, you now watch the accounting. Third, and this is the one that explains most of the cultural staying power. Kratos models a specific form of masculine emotional suppression, and then systematically dismantles it over 20 years of storytelling. The early Kratos is everything masculinity mythology says a man should be. Dominant, destructive, emotionless, controlled by no one. And the result of being that person is everything he loves dies. Everyone around him suffers. He wins every battle and loses every relationship. He becomes the god of war and finds that being the most powerful entity in the pantheon is, in practice, an incredibly lonely and hollow existence. The later Kratos is learning, painfully, laboriously, against every instinct he has, how to be present for another person, how to say, "I was wrong," how to love something without turning it into a casualty.
So basically, God of War is just 6 games of a man slowly going to therapy. Just very violent therapy.
If therapy involved ripping the arms off Norse mythology, then yes, essentially. Here's what I want you to consider, because this is where the investigation changes direction. We've been talking about why Kratos resonates as a character, but the more interesting question is, who specifically is he resonating with? God of War's core demographic is adult men. Men between roughly 25 and 45 years of age who grew up with the original trilogy. Men who were teenagers when Kratos first appeared in 2005, and who are now, in many cases, fathers themselves. The transition from the Greek arc to the Norse arc is not just a narrative choice, it is a demographic mirror. The game aged with its audience, and what it reflected back at them in 2018 was a man who was destructive in his youth, who did real damage, who is now trying, imperfectly, stubbornly, without the right vocabulary, to be a father, to break the cycle, to be different for his child than whatever made him. Millions of people play that game and recognize something they hadn't expected to find in it. The question is no longer, why do people like this powerful character? It's, why does this character trying to be a better father make grown men cry in front of their PlayStations? And the answer to that question is considerably darker than the question suggests. Let's talk about what Kratos offers, what most male characters in fiction do not. Permission to have a past and still be present. Most redemption arcs in fiction operate on a logic of erasure. The character does bad things, suffers, and then becomes good, and the badness is left behind. Clean slate, new man. The past is addressed by the narrative and then filed away. Kratos does not get a clean slate. His past is physically on his body. The white ash is the remains of his murdered wife and daughter, burned into his skin as punishment. He cannot shower it off. He cannot take off the armor that reminds him. Every game begins with the same visual reminder. This man carries what he did on his skin every day. And he functions anyway. He is not destroyed by it. He is shaped by it, impaired by it, and haunted by it. But he continues. He wakes up, he goes out, he protects his son, and he tries. That is a specific kind of hope. Not the hope of being forgiven, not the hope of the past becoming irrelevant, the hope that you can carry something terrible and still be useful to the people in front of you.
Yeah, that one hit different, Winston. You sure you don't want to talk about that?
I want to continue the investigation. There's a scene in God of War Ragnarök that functions as a thesis statement for the entire franchise. Kratos is speaking to his son about what it means to be a god, about the cycle of violence, about whether they can choose differently. And he says, roughly, we must be better than what we were made to be. Not, we must undo what we were. Not, we must forget. We must be better, while being exactly what we are, while knowing what we have done. For a franchise that began with a man punching his way through Greek mythology for revenge, that sentence is doing extraordinary philosophical work. And it resonates because it is functionally the most honest thing most people have ever heard in a video game. Compare this to other attempts at the same archetype. Batman, who never stops being defined by the 8-year-old in the alley. Punisher, whose grief calcified into an identity rather than a wound. Anakin Skywalker, who was destroyed by his own inability to accept loss and becomes the thing he feared. These characters are in various ways consumed by what happened to them. Kratos is consumed by what he did. That is the distinction. And it matters enormously because guilt for someone's own action is a very different psychological experience than victimhood. The audience for Kratos is not primarily identifying with his suffering, they are identifying with his culpability and choosing, like him, to keep going anyways. Here is the uncomfortable part of this investigation, and the part that makes this more than a story about why a video game character is popular. Kratos works in part because he makes something aesthetically appealing that is, in reality, a crisis. The emotional unavailability, the inability to express love in direct terms, the tendency to communicate through sacrifice and action rather than words, the reliance on violence as the primary problem-solving mechanism, the need to be perceived as strong at the exact moment when vulnerability would be more useful. These are not admirable qualities that the game romanticizes. The game explicitly frames them as damage, but the presentation, the voice, the visual weight, the sheer composed authority of the character makes the damage look impressive, even aspirational.
So what you're saying is, people just wanna be the sad buff man.
I'm saying the culture has produced a significant number of men who are emotionally structured like early game Kratos and will consider that a compliment. And the game, to its considerable credit, argues against its interpretation from inside itself. The entire Norse arc is a systemic demonstration that being the strong silent type has a body count attached to it. The people Kratos loves suffer specifically because of his emotional unavailability. His son spends 2 games unsure whether his father actually loves him. His first wife and daughter are dead partly because he was too defined by his role as a weapon to be a husband and a father first. The game is saying this is what you lose when you perform strength instead of practicing presence. The audience is sometimes hearing, this is what a real man looks like. That gap between what the text is doing and what a portion of his audience receives is where the cultural implication lives. Walter White, an entire generation interpreted his arc as a power fantasy rather than a tragedy. The show ends with him destroyed by his own ego, having poisoned a child and watched his family disintegrate, and the dominant cultural reading was, he finally became who was meant to be. Tyler Durden, Fight Club's narrator, is explicitly shown to be losing his mind, constructing a violent ideology out of unprocessed trauma. The author wrote a cautionary tale, and the audience made it a lifestyle. The broken warrior archetype is apparently very easy to misread because the power is visible, the cost is internal, and internal costs are easy to miss when the framing is cinematic.
Winston, you good over there?
I'm conducting an investigation, Toombs.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking about.
We will just continue. Kratos endures because he is a mirror that shows multiple things depending on where you stand. To the young man who is angry and wants to feel powerful, he is permission. To the adult who carries damage and wonders if it can still be useful to the people they love, he is evidence. To the father who doesn't know how to say things he feels, he is a language. And to the culture that keeps producing men who are emotionally structured like weapons and then surprised when relationships become casualties, he is a warning that not enough people are reading correctly. The tragedy of Kratos is not that he is a monster, it's that the world he lived in had no use for him except as one. That every system he encountered, divine, human, familial, wanted the weapon and discarded the person. And that the greatest act of defiance in his story is not killing a god, it is choosing to be a father. In a forest, quietly, without an audience. The world will always have use for the weapon. The question Kratos has been asking for 20 years, the question the games never quite answer for you, is whether the person inside the weapon survives long enough to choose something else. And whether by then, there's still time.
Yeah, okay, that one I felt.
Before you go, I want to leave you with a question. Not about Kratos, about you. The broken warrior archetype works because audiences recognize something in it. The rage, the grief, the difficulty expressing care, the weight of past choices still being carried in the present. So here is the question. When you watch Kratos choose to be different for his son, choose to break the cycle, carry the past without being ruled by it, say the difficult thing instead of going silent, is that inspiring you because you've done it or because you haven't yet? Leave your answer below. I will be reading them with my usual level of warm enthusiasm.
Aight, case closed. Winston done talk. I'm going get a mango man.